Search, and you might find. Search, and you might find. I am an independent journalist, living in a world of news spilling out at an unprecedented rate in the history of mankind. Much of it was false, without any factual evidence. Lies and untruths seem to be the norm. Each morning, when I opened my computer or picked up the mail, it took a good hour to sort through the garbage. Today, I had a pleasant surprise. An invitation from an old friend to spend a quiet weekend in his country manor. It was about 2 years ago since I last saw him at Penelope's wedding. We had a bet their marriage would not last 5 years. As far as I knew, she was still married. But she remained a very demanding woman. At the university, I had been a very close friend of George Webster. He was now Sir Webster, a member of Parliament. He was a pleasant chap with a head of white hair and a round, chubby face with distinctive blue eyes. He had a corpulent body, no doubt, from hearty meals and plenty of drinking. His wife was quite the opposite, with a slender profile and reddish hair arranged like a beehive on the top of her head. She had a wicked sense of humor and was always enjoyable company. I was looking forward to a quiet weekend in the country. I arrived an hour before dinner to face a manor built 200 years ago. George inherited it from his parents. I remember the parties here when we were students at the university. His parents were great hosts, always inviting a selection of pretty young girls. I believe they wanted to make sure George meets the young people they approved of. George came leaping to the front door and hugged me with great affection. I will get the maid to show your room. No need to dress for dinner. We will only be us 3. Come down to the drawing room in half an hour for cocktails. While George handed me a whiskey, I warmly embarrassed his wife. Nothing had changed. The beehive on the top of her head was still in place. I am always delighted to be served at dinner with good food and stimulating conversation. His wife left us the moment an excellent cigar and cognac were forthcoming. Once George's cigar was lit, he spoke. David, do you remember that time at the university I taught you how to catch butterflies? Sure I do. Why are you still an ardent collector and improving your collection? If I remember correctly, you were obsessed with butterflies. Bring your cognac and come with me. I want to show you something. We went down a small passage. At the end was a locked door. George took a key from his pocket, opened the door, and switched on a series of overhead spotlights. I have never seen such a beautiful show of hundreds of butterflies with their vibrant and delicate colors. The room was about 26 square meters, with waist-high side oak cabinets surrounding all the 3 walls. The upper 3 walls were covered with 3 large frames of magnificent pinned butterflies I could see each frame was labeled with the title of 3 continents: the Americas, Europe, and Africa. I stood there, bewildered, completely stunted by the beauty of the room. As I walked in, I noticed a large, comfortable couch in the middle of the room. It was unusual in that it had 2 sides, allowing one to change their position in order to view all sides of the room. In front of each side of the couch was a coffee table. I turned around to view the wall in which the door was positioned. The wall was covered with a wall-to-wall library. George suggested we should sit down. As you notice, I specialize in rare butterflies from 3 land masses. You will notice there is a gape of 2 butterflies in the Americas display. 1 the European and 2 on the African. Under each butterfly, I always mark the date and place it was found. According to my book collection and extensive research, these butterflies represent extremely rare spies. I like to think it is one of the world's greatest collections, representing hundreds of hours of travel and research. To be complete, I need to fill in the 5 missing specimens. George, it is totally amazing. The display of these remarkably beautiful creatures makes one feel belittled when compared with the creations of nature. What's in the drawers below? More butterflies that I thought were interesting on my travels, searching for that rare specimen, as I am known throughout the world as a collector. I have a network of people that inform me that they have seen a rare butterfly. The world has many well-informed amateurs interested in these creatures. In fact, last week, I had a call from a friend in Zimbabwe saying that a flame-bordered carex had been sighted near Victoria Falls. This is one of the extremely rare butterflies I am missing in my collection. Unfortunately, at this time, I cannot leave for Victoria Falls. David, do you want a free 2-week holiday in Zimbabwe? I don't understand. So, well, you could go and spend a few days looking for this rare butterfly. I know you are very careful in netting butterflies without damaging them. The whole trip would be my expense. Supposing I did net this rare butterfly, how would I get it out of the country? No doubt, these creators are protected by strict export laws. You are right, and collectors like me have to be very careful. In the case of Zimbabwe, I would ask you to deliver the specimen to a friend in the capital, Harare. He will then carefully pin it into an old collection of common butterflies that Victorian families love to collect and frame. He will then ship it out to a London antique dealer. This rare butterfly, mixed in an old frame, will go unnoticed by the customs. I can see you are well versed in extracting these treasures from various countries. I have never been to Victoria Falls. They say it is one of the world's spectacular sights. If I agree to go, would there be somebody there to meet me? Yes, my contact would meet you at Victoria's airport. and take you to your hotel. He will be your guide the whole trip. I suggest you spend 2 days as a tourist, and then the next 8 days exploring the forest where the butterfly was sighted. If not found in 8 days, take the plane back home. If you, by a miracle, manage to capture it, I ask you to fly to Harare and give it to my friend there. At this point, I recommend you fly home from there. If an overnight stay is required in the capital, my friend will arrange it. These trips are always a gamble, but to add this butterfly to my collection, it is worth the cost of the gamble. We collectors are brain-damaged human beings, obsessed to complete the items we collect in a satisfying and logical manner. Of course, I will supply all the necessary equipment. You will need to consult your doctor about a trip of this nature, so that he can supply you with all the necessary preventive medicines. No visa at this point is required for Zimbabwe. So are you game? Just a minute. Let me look at my diary. Yes, I think I could go next week. Is that a yes? I will need 24 hours to make a decision, as I have some commitments next week. If you do go, I suggest you go through Johannesburg and then on to Victoria Falls. Leave the return ticket open, as you might want to fly back through Harare. My man, his name is Robin, born near Victoria Falls, will be with you your whole time in Zimbabwe. It had been several years since I was last in Africa. My knowledge of the various countries on the continent was mainly in the north, so to travel to the south would be an interesting venture. As I sat enjoying a first-class meal on British Airways, it did cross my mind that maybe George had already planned my visit before I was asked down for a weekend. No doubt, his thoughts were that a free trip to Victoria would not be turned down. I also realized dedicated collectors will employ any means available to achieve their ambitions. In my mind's eye, I could see him spending evenings in his butterfly room, completely transfixed by the beauty of these creators. No doubt this room is where George found a haven of peace from his responsibilities of his daily existence. These butterflies not only were creators of extreme beauty, but represented for George a lifetime of dedicated research and traveling to far-off lands to find the rare specimen. At the university, he had always been an avid butterfly collector, but I never realized the depth of his passion. I remember enjoying myself on various county outings, looking for interesting butterflies. Now, in an artful way, he has got me involved. He must have thought I might be smitten by the activity. The truth of my interest in this trip was Victoria Falls. Naturally, if by some chance I found the rare butterfly, it would give me a warm feeling of self-esteem. As the air hostess passed, I ordered a glass of champagne and toasted to my success. The African journey had begun. First to admire the falls and to search for the missing rare specimen. Johannesburg Airport was vast, obviously with no restriction on land constraints. No doubt copied from the American and European textbook. You had to walk through large shopping malls filled with many life-size copies of wild animals made out of various woods, clay, and other materials. Sizes and prices for all comers. For a second, I had a vision that this extensive animal kingdom became alive and started to enjoy the sweet human flesh of passengers awaiting planes. Interesting thought, but a chilling turn of events. At the airport, I found Robin waiting. The first thing I noticed as we drove towards the hotel was the soft and seductive African daylight with a warm weather that seemed to envelop you in its arms. Also, through the car window, I was able to admire a series of magnificent trees unique to Africa. About 10 kilometers from Victoria Falls, we turned up a small country road to the hotel. There, I found a little patch of paradise. It corresponded to the photographs shown on the internet. Only 16 bungalows that stretched from a central lodge. I was curious to see the rooms that were described as about 150 square meters with bath and showing facilities. Lounging space with a king-sized bed area protected by a mosquito net. The first time I experienced sleeping under a mosquito net was in Barbados years ago. In those days, it just hung over the bed and needed pulling down. Of course, I was unaware of this procedure. The next morning, I had just one big mosquito bite. Funny how certain circumstances, you quickly learn to use things properly. Back to the hotel, the entrance hall and lounges were decorated to an ambiance of yesteryear. Spacious, elegant, and tasteful. The smiling staff treated me as if I had just come home after a trip up country. I had a vision of wearing riding boots, putting my feet up, and asking someone to pull them off. Before I was taken to my room, we sat down with a cup of tea. George's man, Robin, explained why I was here to take photos of butterflies for a London magazine. Before the shooting commenced, we would take 2 days to see the falls. While drinking our tea, the hotel's hostess kindly explained that to walk the length of the falls is a 2.4 miles walk with several stops to admire the view. Also to dry out from the spray and mist generated by the falls. As it was the rainy season, the falls would be near their maximum flow of 2,800 cubic meters of water per second, as opposed to 300 metric cubes in the dry season. We decided to visit on the first 2 mornings. Now to the room. As we entered, I had the feeling of being introduced to Zimbabwe under British rule. This was the state of play. Everything and everybody has their place. I walked through the room to the balcony at the far end, noticing on my way a bar full of all the drinks imaginable. I opened the glass screen windows to experience the Africa of one's dreams. It was a small valley running down to a water hole. I quickly realized the hotel was on a slight rise, protecting it from the multitude of animals slowly grazing their way to water. One could not ask for a more idyllic view. I was to spend a few hours on this balcony, just observing the animal kingdom going about their daily lives. The room was delightful and serviced with all the facilities to make your stay a pleasing memory. I had a bizarre feeling that for the privileged, Africa must have been a very pleasant place. The next morning, heralded by a dawning sun, breakfast on the terrace with interesting choices of food. Robin drove me to see the falls. 20 minutes drive, we were in the Victoria Falls, parking after being heralded by African folks dancing at the gate. Armed with waterproof capes, we set off towards the falls. The first encounter was the noise, the next the spry, and then through the trees we saw the watershed. It is a sight so awesome, it literally took your breath away. The beauty, the palm hour, and the light and mist reflected from the cascade of water is frightening. I was inspired to write a poem in acknowledgement of its beauty. I knew a magazine in London that might be interested in publishing it. The Falls, Victoria, Zimbabwe. On the horizon, across those vast lands, I saw a wispy sight of mist raising for the earth. No apparent panic from the wildlife. A fire, it is not. The nearer I get, a rainbow arching is beauty skywards. Then I heard the rumbling sound like thunder. There, covered in spay, is a mystery and magic that unfolds. Gigantic, awesome water falls from majestic heights, falls in torrents of spectacular proportions, careers deep into the river below. The beauty of the falls is in its majestic power, a never-ending cascade of turbulent water. This power dominates your mind and soul. Torrents of water flow through your veins. You are left exhausted and on occasions wet from the spray. One feels very small, experiencing nature's magnificence. The original explorers never saw the falls from the air. The mighty river in its majesty is a glorious prelude before it turns into the eternal beauty of the falls. One visit is not enough for the tranquility of your spirit. The second visit, the falls were shrouded in mist and spray. Then, by the hand of God, the curtains opened, all her power and glory exposed to the naked eye. In bended knee, you threw your arms to heaven in admiration. We spent the next day at the falls. Their splendor and magic had the same force of attraction as the previous day. On our third day, Robin took me to the forest where the characte had been sighted. There were plenty of butterflies, and I practiced catching a few. When I let them go, I enjoyed watching them fly into the magnificent trees. Robin was most amused. He told me he had spent many days with George, chasing butterflies. It was my fourth day in the forest, after spending many hours walking and watching the constant movement of these colorful creatures, that we saw the butterfly that Georges hungered for to complete his collection. There it was, on a branch, enjoying the evening sun. I took a deep breath, moved slowly and quietly forward. All my practicing of using the butterfly net paid off. George had provided me with a special prepare box to keep the precious creator in. That night at the hotel, we had an excellent dinner with champagne. The next morning, we left for Harare. Robin and I found with difficulty George's friend in a scheduled part of the capital. He was a taxidermist, owning a store full of the various wildlife found in Zimbabwe. Once, he saw the butterfly that George had already contacted him about. His face lit up with excitement. I never thought you would find it. Incredible. My friend George will be in seventh heaven. Later that day, I said goodbye to Rodin and gave him a handsome tip for all his kindness and help. Sitting on the long flight to London, I thought about my little adventure. 2 days as a tourist, visiting one of the world's great wonders, was like a dream. Then, a few days tramping through the forest, searching for a rare butterfly, had the thrilling flavor of the chase. Completing my mission was a very satisfying end. 3 weeks later, when picking up the morning mail, I noticed a letter from George. He told me everything was in order. There are no words to thank you. When you have a moment, come down to see us. He enclosed a handsome check for my intervention. David Nutt, December 2024, The Midnight Ride. It was a dark night, one of those without any stars to look at, and a dark moon. Not even the universe was interested in what was about to happen. There was no spotlight over me, nor a guiding light to help me escape. As I ran to my car, one of my heels broke, and I twisted my ankle. I took out the shoes and limped to the door while looking for the keys in my purse. Damn big fancy bags. This whole scenario would have been much easier with jeans and sneakers. But that was not something I could change, and dreaming about better times would not help me either. My hands were trembling, and I was about to empty the bag when I touched the furry pom-pom I had attached to my keychain days before. I took out the keys, opened the door, and once I was inside, I locked the car. The street was empty. No one was screaming my name or running after me, and I took a deep breath before starting the motor. When I passed the campus gates, I felt light and smiled. I was free, and I felt happy. Before entering the highway, I stopped at the last traffic light and adjusted the mirror. I could not even remember the last time I touched it. And then, when I lowered it, I saw them smiling at me and waving. I tried to open the door. I wanted to jump out, but Amir moved his arm to my neck and pinned me to my seat. Ezra moved to the front slowly, while I struggled to move or breathe. Suddenly, everything hurt, and I did the only thing I could. I pushed the gas pedal with my foot, and my ankle cracked, making the pain even worse. Ezra took the wheel, while I tried to free myself from the strangling arm. But Amir whispered in my ear, "This will happen, whether you like it or not. I gave you the choice." His teeth sank into my neck, and as the pressure increased in my skin and the wound started to burn, I felt my life running away from me. The blood spilled over my white dress, forming stains that seemed broken rose petals. And shortly after, my head fell on Ezra's lap, and the car stopped in the middle of the highway. "Move her," said Amir. And Ezra grabbed my body and threw it to the back seat like I was weightless. Amir sat in the driver's seat, and once Ezra sat by his side, the car started again. I could barely breathe. The only thought in my mind was how much blood I had lost, and how much more was now running down the leather I was lying in. I had no more pain, but I was starting to feel cold. And although I wanted desperately to scream and cry, I just couldn't. He betrayed me, I thought. He's helping him. I heard the sound of the radio buzzing, and then the music. Sympathy for the devil. Really? I thought, and I felt like laughing, though I couldn't. Would he now take the end of his sleeves and take them out of his jacket? What would the 16-year-old me have done in this situation? I should have been given an option and not forced into this. The sun was rising when I woke up. Everything around me was flooded with orange light, and I felt the warmth as the first rays touched my skin. I did not want to open my eyes fully, but I understood I was not gone, at least not completely, which meant I still had the right to see the sun again. It burned at first, though. Everything hurt, but I did not mind. It was like something else was pushing for me, and my body did not belong to me anymore. I was still in the back of the car, and my dress and the seat were drenched in red. My blood. How had I lost so much blood? Why was I awake? I raised my head, and my neck cracked. I never liked that sound, but that day, it was scarier than ever. The light passing through the front window blinded me for a second, but when I got used to it, I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. I opened my mouth, but the words did not come out. Ezra, I thought, convinced that I still had that power on me, that he would listen to my thoughts, that he would attend my command if Amir were far away from us. Ezra, please. But he did not turn. I moved my arm. I wanted to sit, but I couldn't. My limbs failed me, and the only thing I managed was to grab his arm and fall to the car floor. He moved then, but not the way I expected. I was still holding his sleeve when I saw the blood crossing his arm, the wound in his neck, and his eyes opened, lost, lifeless. Then someone opened the door, grabbed me by the ankles, and dragged me out of the car. I felt the pain once more, like someone was stabbing me with those expensive shoes I had bought weeks before. When my head hit the floor, I closed my eyes. I did not want to see what was about to happen. "You complain too much," said Amir, though I knew I was the only one who could hear him. There he was, again, inside my head. "You are such a romantic," he continued. He was not helpful, no matter how much you tried to make him. He was not worthy. He helped you, I thought. He was just a pretty puppet. And the puppets are good to play. I still had my eyes closed and felt a tear running down my face. "He'll kill me. This all will pass," I thought. "Don't be ridiculous," I heard. "We have work to do. I don't like to waste talent, tama, or blood. You should know that about me already." After getting rid of Ezra, he lifted my body as if I were a little rag doll and sat me in the passenger seat. The leather was sticky and smelled funny, but sweet. "You'll recover soon. Don't worry. You'll be buying new shoes in no time," he said, as he started the car and put on his sunglasses. The car moved away, and as the sunlight warmed my face, I knew I'd have to come up with a better plan to leave that life, that work, and that man. Columbine. Every night, the fog killed scores of us. The city of Metro needed a hero to protect them. And so I rose up and became the super-powered woman to save them all. I am Maverick, named for the city's most usually seen creature of flight. My civilian identity is Cora Neely. When I took up the mantle of the heroic Maverick, I left behind my former mundane life as a citizen to combat crime in all its insidious forms. I usually triumphed, earning the keys to the city. I met more than I expected when I encountered someone called Columbine. Columbine was my arch foe, a foe of extraordinary caliber, if one were afraid of clowns. She was a commedia dell'arte-themed supervillain whose motive was to destroy the city of Metro, weaponizing lethal gas in the form of mist in our city every night that killed many inhabitants. Her motive was to eradicate Handcroft Laboratories, an organization responsible for medicine and chemicals vital to Metro's health and progress. One day, I discovered a formidable truth when we battled amid the towering skyscrapers of Metro. I was having a midnight flight when she arrived, indigo-haired with matching lipstick, taunting me with maniacal laughter. Up until this moment, I had yet to meet someone so unhinged and so glaringly dangerous. We would grow close in later years, but that night, the fight was for mutual detest as much as it was about survival. The birdie's a long way from her nest," she said in a sing-songy voice. Columbine's face was contorted into a grimacing leer behind her clown half-mask. "Metro is mine to protect," I told her. "I hail from the faraway citadel of Celestion, where we have no tolerance for common criminals such as yourself. I dare you to fly, to fight. Come and stop me," she said, firing bullets at me. My wings deflected her shots. I swooped into the air with metallic wings, shedding my trench coat. Once I reached her level, on the rooftop where she stood, I lurched forward, holding her by the neck. She pivoted, slashing at me with an intricate dagger. I dodged the blows, my wings slicing through the air. Columbine freed herself from my wrenching grasp, and we continued our battle, parrying back and forth in a vicious dance of death. She danced a vile ballet throughout the rooftops, acrobatically dodging all of the blades that I slung at her. She stepped forward and cradled my jaw, speaking in a hushed tone. "Look how you're all alone in life, waiting for even more recognition for gift-wrapped victories that you never deserved," she said. "Join me. This wretched city could be ours if you let it." I wrestled myself away, shaking my head at her attempt to seduce me into defeat with her carefully chosen words. Columbine knew my weakness and wasn't afraid to use it against me. "You're wicked scum," I spat out. "Then die alone," she said. Was it true she was truly insane? "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo," she whispered, bellowing the last word while firing more bullets at me from a vintage hand rifle. I deflected again and surged towards her, slicing her neck with my razor-sharp wing. She coughed, stumbling downward to the street below, feeling something akin to pity that I could not name. I descended and caught her, and we plummeted to the street. Columbine clutched at my collar. I leaned closer. With a trembling hang, she removed her mask to reveal patterns of acid lesions trailing from her forehead to her right jaw. There's something that you should know about Handcroft Labs. They're not the city's saving grace. They held me captive since infancy and experimented on me. They took away the closest thing I had to a father figure, disfigured my face. I'm the villain I am because of Handcroft. Stay far away. I was stunned. The same place that was about to provide an antidote to Columbine's venomous fog was what twisted her into something possibly past saving. Was she right? Unable to shake her words from my head, I flew to the nearest hospital, dropped her at the door, and set out to investigate her claims for myself. Columbine's civilian identity was that of a theatrical drama teacher. One afternoon, I visited her at her school and pleaded with her to cease the toxic nightly mist. She relented with downcast eyes. "What are you really here for?" she asked. I said softly. I want to make sure that you're all right after. Well, let's forget the homicidal pleasantries. I found out that you're right about Handcroft. Turns out that they're up to more harmful things than just university science projects. So, you believe me? Asked Columbine. We'll see, but it's a start, I said. Cora, listen to me. When this thing, she gestured to her mask, this Columbine thing takes over, I can't control. No worries, I said, trying to understand her in some way. This city I used to put on a spectacle, pits us against each other. It's outside both of our control. As time went on, we continued our game of fighting and alternately reconciling, with no conclusive winner every time. Sometimes I let her get away. Other times, she purposely ceased to slay me. She was right about Handcroft, so we joined forces to end their schemes forever. Having succeeded, we became more than hero and villain. We were connected by a common goal. Months later, we grew closer, me and Columbine. At one time, I woke up and got out of bed to find that she wasn't in my room anymore. There was a note. Dear Cora, I can't keep up this charade anymore. I have to go after an enemy of yours on my own. I'm sorry. Columbine Claude XOXO. I wept for hours at losing someone I had fought alongside to save our city. When my tears ceased to fall, there was one thing I knew for certain: that I would hunt Columbine down from every corner of the earth until I found her. My search would continue. Storm Emmett, TW Death of Humans and Animals. Storm Emmett, from her elevated position in her fishmonger shop, Kellen could oversee the town, the harbor, and the storm beyond. She pressed Pa's binoculars against the shop's rear window and studied the waves in the English Channel, churning as though they were being stirred within a giant cauldron. Darkened clouds blotted out the sun, giving the impression that it was night rather than the middle of the afternoon. A lone fishing trawler plowed into a gray wave in a desperate attempt to reach the shelter of the harbor. The lights of the vessel flicking in and out of view. Feeling a pang of pity for the crew of the trawler, Kaylin turned her attention to the harbor. The beach was invisible, submerged beneath the waterline. The storm ripped a garish flag, depicting a cartoon sun wearing sunglasses, free from the ice cream kiosk on the seawall, and tossed it into a breaking wave. The few vessels in harbor, with any exposed fabric rippling in the wind, strained at their mooring lines. As the trawler rounded the seawall and entered the limited safety of the harbor, Kaylin glanced over her childhood home. So far, the storm had stripped most of the aerials from their rooftops and had collapsed half a dozen chimneys. But there would be worse to come. She could remember when Port Carrick had been a quaint fishing village, most well known for its natural harbor, and later its Victorian lighthouse. She glanced at the lighthouse, now considered a Grade 2 listed building, as the ship skirted by its base, and wondered what the Victorians and the generations before them would have thought about this storm. Kellen glanced out the shop window and at the cobbled street that wound its way down to the harbor, decided it was unlikely she would receive any customers, and bolted the door. Although she had become nose blind to the smell of the fish, she had yet to grow used to the countless, lifeless eyes watching her from shelves of ice. She failed to suppress a shiver. A warm shower would raise her spirits and provide an excuse to return to her novel afterwards. Something rapped at the door. Kellen jumped. A yellow mass that looked pixelated behind the frosted glass peered inside. Hello? Who is it? The figure was wearing a yellow Macintosh, and something gray was protruding from their face. The owner of the coat was stooped over, casting a shadow through the glass. Hello? She said again. The figure rapped on the door with a gloved hand. Kellen heard the person speak, but their words were lost to the wind. Their Cornish accent, however, was unmistakable. Ernest, is that you? Kellen unbolted the door. Ernest stumbled inside, his rain-sodden boots leaving puddles on the floor. Christ, you kept me out there for long enough, didn't you? He muttered as he lowered his hood. Kellen spotted rainwater dribbling from the man's beard. Couldn't see who it was, she answered, closing the door. Ernest unzipped his coat, and Kellen saw he had failed to change out of his fishing overalls. They clung to him like a second skin. Were you up on the coastal path? Or was that you coming back into the harbor just now? Kellen asked. Ernest mopped his face and offered her a toothless smile. As he did so, Kellen glimpsed the Ernest she knew. Growing up, the smiling man telling stories on the harbor side. Now his smile seemed forced, almost desperate. We were fishing. It isn't safe. Is it safe to go out in that? Kellen asked, turning the thought, spoken by the voice of her pa, into a question. We've been out in worse, Ernest said. Kellen decided not to question this lie. Can't imagine you caught much in this weather. They were saying on the news that the storm keeps growing over Cornwall. No end in sight, they said. We caught plenty. I've never known us to be so lucky before. The fish must love the weather. Best haul we've had in years. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. He held up an object wrapped in brown paper. I wanted to show you this before it goes to market tomorrow. She watched as Ernest placed the package onto the counter and began to unwrap it. Cod, he announced, and stepped away. Kellen examined the fish. Its mouth was ajar. Its dull silver skin was flecked with tints of orange. Right, she said. It'll go lovely with chips, I'm sure. What's... It has fangs. What? Look. Ernest stuck his index finger into the fish's mouth and peeled back the lips. 2 teeth. So large, Kellen could have called them tusks, protruded from the fish's lower jaw. She failed to suppress a gasp. It looks like a vampire, Ernest said, with a dry chuckle. What's caused that then? Dunno. Might be a freak of nature. Vampire cod. Is there such a thing? Anyway, I wanted you to see it. That's all. Unless you want it. Kellen considered this, but the fish would only be useful as a party piece. Not that she attended any of those. No, she said. Keep it. Put it with the rest of your catch. Or better yet, have it for your supper. Clearly disappointed. He hadn't raised as much excitement as he had hoped. Kellen watched Ernest wrap up the fish as though it were a Christmas present. You coming down to the market tomorrow morning, buying your wares? Yeah, Kellen said, before the Emmets get out of bed. Mind you, Storm's keeping most of those away anyway. Like rats, Ernest said, zipping up his coat. Plague rats. Or leeches. Coming down from London and the like. No, don't you tut. Your pa would agree with me. They're bloody running us out of our own home. Kellen wasn't sure if the remark had been aimed at her, but knew her pa wouldn't have agreed. He had loved the tourists, the lifeblood of Cornwall he had called them, and would often preach that without them, the county wouldn't be as prosperous as it was now. It had been his idea, although he hadn't had time to implement it, to send the fish to London via train rather than selling them locally. It was essential to keep the shop afloat. She wondered what he would think of the storm. I'll see you tomorrow, Kellen said, before Ernest could speak, and closed the door behind him. Kellen woke the following morning exhausted. The storm was anything but. On her walk down to the market, she was surprised to find that her shop had remained undamaged, while the rest of the village had not been so lucky. Both the primary school and New Town Hall had been struck by lightning, leaving blackened, scorched marks on their roofs. More chimneys had been felled, in addition to several dozen roof tiles. The content of the village's drains had spilled out onto the streets. Two builders were arguing at the base of the lighthouse, beside a van containing building supplies, their argument turning into a brawl as she passed. Kellen hurried on after learning Ernest had already left for another day's fishing and placing her order. She returned to her shop and continued her novel until she spotted a yellow figure hurrying up the hill that evening, hood lowered against the rain. Got another one, Ernest cheered as he entered. Kellen placed her book onto the counter. Another what? Cod with fangs? No, but similar. Ernest opened the brown parcel in his hand and dropped something that looked like congealed jelly onto the counter with a splat. Kellen snatched up her novel. Is that a squid? She asked, studying the array of tentacles. An octopus, Ernest beamed. Kellen stared at the dead creature. Its bulbous head swayed from side to side, like a king cobra. Tentacles lay out in every direction across the counter, which was now covered in a layer of salt water and ink. Kellen poked at one of the lifeless suckers. It's wrong, her pa's voice said. Unnatural. You don't get octopuses off Cornwall, she said. You do sometimes. Very rare, though, and never this big. But look, it has an extra arm. What? Kaylin counted. Oh my God, a 9-armed octopus, she muttered. I've never seen the like. Wrong, her pa's voice said again, filled with a sudden sense of revulsion. Kellen took a step away from the counter. It's that storm, Ernest said. It's brought all sorts in. We're making a killing out there. As he spoke, Kaylin heard a distant crash and felt the ground tremble. She suspected that a tree had blown over on the coastal path. Did you hear that? But Ernest hadn't seemed to have noticed. I might donate it to the RNLI station, see if they want it on display. Or the new town hall, maybe? If there's anything of it left standing after the storm. I saw the bloody mayor having a right go at some of the repairmen just now. Proper waving and shouting, he was. The builders were going on about some Celtic graves they were told to dig over or something. Should have called in some specialist, they were saying. I don't know. Anyway, we brought some more fish in, me and the men. We're going to do a night fishing trip, so there might be more fish for you to buy tomorrow. Unless, of course, you want to send it up to those fancy hotels in London. That's what they're saying down in the market. That we're not good enough for you. That's where the money is, Kaylin explained. But Ernest had started ranting again. Your pa, if he could see you now, would be disgusted. Do you know that, girl? He would have been sick. Although Kaylin had spent her childhood in this building, she had never worked in it. Now she wished she had paid more attention when Pa was discussing margins and cost-cutting measures. He died. She had returned from London, discovered she had inherited the shop, and felt the weight of his legacy land across her shoulders. It was his idea, Kaylin began. A traitor against your own home, running up to London. Listen, Ernest, I don't want your octo. Ernest snatched up the dead creature, bundled it back into the parcel, and fled the shop. Kaylin, wondering if storms could affect human behavior in the same way it could affect animals, bolted the door behind him. Just in case, when Kaylin opened the shop the next morning, she saw that the cobble street outside had been transformed into a miniature river. A brown torrent of water washed its way down the coastal path, round the street, and disappeared towards the harbor. Hurrying up the flooded street, waving his arms, was Ernest. Swearing, Kaylin snatched up her coat and left the shelter of her shop. "What are you doing?" she shouted, as Ernest continued to stagger towards her, his arms spinning to maintain his balance. She felt the rain penetrate her shirt and shivered as droplets ran down her spine. "If you fall, you'll be washed away." "Beach," Ernest answered, pointing down to the harbor. "What?" Ernest's mouth moved, but only half the sentence reached her. Washed up on the beach. The wind stole his words, and the hammer of the raindrops was so loud that the sound created reminded Callan of white noise. "What is? What's on the beach?" Kellen thought she heard the word whale in his reply, but couldn't be sure. "What's on the beach?" she asked again, bellowing over the wind. "Everything. Fish, crabs, debris, the lot. The tide has brought tons of stuff. Everyone's helping themselves. Kellen peered down at the harbor through the sheet of rain. The occupants of the village were sprinting, some wading, through the flooded streets and towards the coastline. Ernest offered out his hand. Come on, before all the good stuff is taken. You can find something good to sell. Help your pa's sinking shop. Don't go to the beach. No? Ernest, wait. Stop. Kellen watched a flicker of irritation pass over his face. What? I don't think this is a good idea. Why not? It's free. The bounty of the sea. Ain't no law against it. Kellen shook her head and took a step back towards the shop. Pa said we should always respect the sea, she said, but knew, as soon as the words left her lips, that it was a feeble defense. You ain't got no spine, Ernest spat. Your pa would recognize opportunity when it came. If he were still here, that shop would be doing fine, wouldn't it? He turned and staggered his way back towards the harbor. Kellen stumbled through the water and to the shelter of her shop. Snatching up Pa's binoculars, she scanned the beach. The lighthouse light washed over the sands, illuminating the scrap metal and shards of wreckage. Kellen wondered if they had come from a shipwreck, but then noticed that some of the debris was moving. Fish flopped helplessly in the sands as crabs attempted to escape the waves. Maybe it has been a fishing trawler. It hadn't been Ernest's ship. She could see that in the harbor, and no other ship had dared to leave the shelter of the seawall. Her gaze fell on a chunk of dull metal nestled on the edge of the beach. She shrieked when the metal rolled over and opened its mouth. She couldn't hear the animal's screams, but she could imagine them. The whale calf slapped its tail against the rocks, but remained ignored by the villagers as they searched for salvage. Kellen waited. The clouds were as black as tar, and the sea the same color to match. After an hour, she decided that a giant wave would not appear to wash the villagers away. Likewise, a sea monster would fail to materialize. Kaylin, still wrestling with the knot of dread in her stomach, continued to watch the ignored whale calf as its movements slowed and ceased. The humans passed around the carcass, either oblivious or uncaring. It's what the storm wants, her pa's voice said again, and no matter how much she tried, she couldn't ignore him. It's what the storm wants. Kellen spotted Ernest's ship leaving the harbor. The lighthouse began to lean. Ernest's ship disappeared under the collapsing tower and was replaced by a silent plume of water. The plume turned into a wave and began to advance. Kellen screamed. The beach vanished in an instant. The marine life reclaimed. The sea wall broke within seconds. Moments later, the harbor was destroyed. The ships at anchor swamped or cast aside as though they were children's toys. The occupants of the village were washed away, their screams stolen by the wind and salt water. The RNLI station was submerged from view. Kellen, fully realizing how pointless it was, bolted her shop door shut The roof of the new town hall crumbled, disappearing behind the row of cottages. The wave charged up the cobbled street, the debris carried in its flow, striking the remaining homes like shrapnel. Kellen closed her eyes and thought of her pa. The wave reached her shop door, paused, and receded. She opened her eyes to see the water retreating down the hill, flowing back into the harbor and breaking upon the remains of the seawall. The rain had stopped. The clouds had drifted away. Port Carrick was silent, as was her pa's voice, the demon in the portrait. Denise Gray looked away from her reflection in the store window. The sight of that perfectly proportioned young body only served to remind her of the curse. As a young woman, she'd posed for an enigmatic artist who had painted her picture while spinning words that were at once wonderful and frightening. It hadn't been long after that she learned the reality of the painting and its associated curse. One day, she was accosted by a thief, and before she realized what was happening, he had run a dagger through her heart. She cringed, but when the thief pulled the knife out, there was no blood where she had been stabbed. A swift kick to the groin sent him running, but when she opened her now ruined blouse, she realized that she was unharmed, not even a scratch. Denise thought about it and realized that her situation was like a story her mother had told her, called The Painting of Dorian Gray. "Damn," she whispered as she scraped her knee on a large rock that she'd brushed against, only to look down and realize that her forever young body was still unharmed. She realized that she would have to return to the artist's studio, and if that painting was damaged, she would have to force the artist to find a way to lift the curse without killing her before her time. When she returned to confront the artist, she found him hanging in his studio, dead. Her search for the painting in his studio was in vain, and it was only after another attack that she realized the truth of the curse. The knife had pierced her heart, but again, she felt no pain after the knife had been pulled from her chest. She tracked the painting down to a gallery in a distant town, only to watch the painting destroyed by fire as the gallery burned to the ground, killing the hundreds of people inside. She'd spent many hours waiting for the death that never came. After that, she tried every means of killing herself, but to no avail. Finally, she felt a glimmer of hope as she learned of a book of paintings that had a copy of her painting in it. That book was rumored to be in this tiny library. She took a deep breath as she approached the tiny library. She knew she had to do something, or she would go insane from not being able to die. Denise had arrived just as Jessie had left the library and moved toward the tavern. An hour while the poor, pregnant librarian took lunch wouldn't make a lot of difference, she thought, as she sat down on a nearby bench. She smiled as a group of children ran by. One little brown-eyed girl stopped and smiled back then ran to join her friends. "The book you want is here," Jessie said, "but you may be disappointed. The book is a manual for destroying demons." "I don't feel like a demon," Denise said. Jessie slid the leather hand-bound book toward Denise. "What happens if I open it?" Jessie shrugged. "I haven't read that far." Denise felt a tingling race up her arm as she pulled the book toward herself. What if she got sucked into the book when she opened it? She looked down at her ruined blouse. She'd neglected to change the blouse, even though she had another in her small travel bag. Throwing caution to the wind, she opened the book. Being stuck in the book would be no worse than not being able to kill herself. The first thing she saw was a horrible version of herself. Her hair was singed, and every injury she'd sustained in getting there had scarred over. When she could finally pull her eyes away from the picture, she began to read. The demon her painting had become had spoken from the painting and convinced the artist to hang himself. Then she had started the fire that destroyed the original painting, killing all the people there for the unveiling. Denise slammed the book closed. The pull of the woman in the painting was more than she could stand. "Are you affected as well?" Denise asked, only to be met by a blank stare from Jessie. A few moments later, her unborn child, kicking wildly, stirred Jessie back to life. "We have to destroy the book," Denise said. Jessie shook her head. "She will take us all with her." Denise slammed her hand down on the book before Jessie could open it. "That's exactly what she wants you to think. But trust me," Jessie's unborn baby kicked so hard that she gasped. "I can't help you. I'll take care of it," Denise said, taking the book and leaving the library. Denise counted herself lucky that the tiny library was on a small tropical island with an active volcano. It would only take her half a day to get to the volcano cone, light the book on fire, and drop it into the liquid lava below. She only hoped that would be enough. As she moved toward the volcano, the book and the demon it contained recognized her intent. "Hand over that book," the huge Polynesian man standing in her way said, his gun drawn. On some level, Denise knew that the man was under the influence of the demon. She ran around him and felt the bullet from his gun rip through the ruined blouse and on through her right shoulder. By the time she reached the trail at the edge of the volcano, she could feel the demon trying to stop her. Branches and thorns reached out for her, only to rip more holes in her ruined blouse as she ran toward the summit. Finally, she reached the edge of the cauldron and the bubbling lava below. "No!" The sound of the wind and the rush of the heat shouted as the edges of the book began to smoke. The book burst into flames as she tossed the book toward the lava. It hung suspended above the lava, flaming bigger and brighter, but without being consumed. Suddenly, she noticed that the young girl she'd seen before had caught up to her. "It's drawing power from your blouse." Denise shook her head. None of this made sense. The blouse had taken the brunt of the damage inflicted on her and was ragged and full of holes. You have to destroy the blouse as well, the girl said, before racing away from the lip. At the bottom of the trail, she saw the other children blocking the way of the adults who were under the influence of the book. Denise turned to see flame explode from the book and realized that she had no choice. If destroying the blouse didn't work, she would have to offer herself to the volcano. But this glimmer of hope had given her a reason to live. She pulled the remains of that ruined blouse off and threw it down at the boiling lava below. The atmosphere around the book howled in rage as the blouse fluttered to the surface of the lava and then burst into flames. The book exploded, scattering burning ash over everything. Before Denise could react, the same young girl was pulling her away from the lip of the cauldron. She stumbled into the group and children, and then her world went black. Denise remembered that blouse as the one that the artist had insisted she wear while he worked on the painting. What happened after that was a blur until that book exploded over the cauldron. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes to the soft light of the sun coming in through the curtains of a cottage near the ocean. It was a dream, she thought, until she realized that she wasn't wearing the blouse anymore. The painting and the book had been destroyed, but she didn't know about the curse. She inspected her body and then wrapped a sheet around her till she could find some clothes. Denise opened the door and saw children playing in front of the cottage, then stepped onto the porch and noticed a thorny bush near the steps into the yard. She idly pricked her finger and gave a sigh of relief as she realized that the curse was gone when a tiny drop of blood formed on her finger. "The children told us how you saved us," Jessie said as she approached from the side yard. Denise shrugged. "I needed to be free of the curse," Jess smiled. "The children like having you around, and we are in the market for school teacher." Denise had never considered anything like this. She'd been so young when the nightmare started. She looked down. Her body was still young, and if the kids had trusted her, maybe she could try. It beats modeling, she thought, as she followed Jessie back toward the cottage. Care, tea for 3. Checking the day's schedule, Maud looked forward to meeting her first-time client, Silesia. Her daily prep included the wide variety of tea blends sufficient to the day's demands. Maud called her social events pours. Modeled after the traditional Japanese tea ceremony, she aimed deeper than mere tranquility. Her delicious, blended teas reoriented her clients' views of themselves and the world. She tailored each concoction individually by adding herbs and essential oils. Every ingredient was organic and non-toxic. Of course, it was all legal. Maud acquired her skill by studying under a Peruvian shaman for a decade. Her second scheduled client called himself Ted, not his real name. Maud hadn't met him, but she knew him well. A columnist at the local newspaper, he was her most strident critic. Maud intended to reorient Ted's views, good and hard. Ted and other critics claimed Maud ran a cult. She scoffed at such descriptions. They've obviously never attended my tea parties. Clients choose to return. They're not compelled. She maintained a low public profile. Finding self-promotion distasteful, Maud didn't advertise. She didn't need to. Word of mouth brought most of her clients seeking relief from a life out of balance. They generally left happy. Critics wondered why no one in City Hall cared to lift her veil of secrecy. Maud dismissed rumors, claiming she was a close confidant of politicians and society mavens. Maud admitted to modifying the tea ceremony into something unique. Her pores were for anyone seeking to rebalance. The pores logo was a modified yin-yang symbol, depicted as floating within the bowl of a bamboo spoon. She didn't tell fortunes, wasn't a guru, and didn't run a seance, nor was she a matchmaker, though some had found love after meeting through her. That was serendipity at play, not Maud. Maud also adamantly rejected the term therapist. She firmly rejected suggestions her pores were a form of group therapy. She abhorred insinuations that she practiced without a license. As the appointed time for this day's pour approached, Maud prepared a special tea for Ted. Not knowing Silesia's needs and temperament, she waited. Her standard blends would do until she knew more. Maud resisted temptation regarding Ted. Poison was an option to which she refused to stoop. But she had prepared something special for him. Maud was confident that when Ted left the pour, his attitude would be radically different from the one he brought. With a few minutes before the pour, Maud sat in silence, with her hands folded. The bell rang. Maud opened the door to Silesia, wearing a short, strapless sundress and a broad-brimmed straw hat. Silesia thrust out her hand. "Maud? Yes, welcome to my pour." Maud waved her in and saw Ted coming up the walk in a suit and tie. She introduced herself and led them to the dedicated pour room. Silesia talked rapidly. "It's such a beautiful day. Perfect for a little tea, don't you think?" Maud nodded. Ted lagged behind, taking note of the decor and the layout of the house. Silesia continued without pausing for breath. "But it's so beautiful. A shame to spend it cooped up inside. I love going down to the river walk and watching the ducks and the boats and the birds flying overhead. The trees make such lovely shade, and each fluttering leaf responds to every slight breeze. Is there any way we can reschedule? I hate to waste the day inside." Once in the room, Maud indicated where they should sit. "Well, you're here now. We won't be all day, bright and shadowless." The pour room had no windows. No pictures adorned the walls, which had climbing vines painted on them. A ficus tree stood in one corner. A low table sat amidst plush pillows. A table beside Maud had a gas fire, teapots, space for preparation, and teacups. Silesia and Ted did a little dance, trying to decide who should sit where. Maud pointed and said, "No, Silesia there. Ted, please sit here." They sat. Silesia giggled like a little girl. Ted's face shifted between annoyance and boredom. Maud prepared the tea with bamboo utensils and served them each a cup. She said, "This first cup should relax you. Take a moment to enjoy. Sip carefully. It's hot." Silesia downed the cup in one gulp and screamed as she spit it out. She grabbed a napkin and wiped tea off herself and the table. "Wow, sorry, that was hot." Ted rolled his eyes. The first serving of tea was intended to break the ice. Maud never wanted clients to think of their poor experience as akin to riding in an elevator. They were past that. Whatever their stated purpose, Maud sensed subtle emotional currents at work. Her blends worked to rebalance each person, regardless their emotional state. Wanting the tea to bring everyone into a state of calm, she poured them another cup. She leaned toward Silesia. "Are you okay?" "It's hot." "Hot. Right. Got the message." Silesia blew on the cup and sipped. "Oh, this is good." Maud turned to Ted. "And how are you, Ted?" Startled from his reverie, Ted took a moment. He reined in his disdain for what he thought an elaborate charade. "This is different from the expected traditional tea ceremony." "Oh, what have you heard?" "I never tell people to expect that." "Well, to start," he pointed at Silesia, "this badly dressed, classless woman is rude, won't stop talking, doesn't carry a fan." Silesia scowled and rummaged through her purse. Pulling out a battery-operated fan, she switched it on. The little propeller spun, blowing strands of her hair back. With eyes fluttering, she smiled at the breeze in her face. Giggling, she aimed it at Ted, blocking the draft with his hands. He said, "Never mind. Turn it off. Keep it to yourself." Silesia winked at Maud and, giggling, returned the fan to her purse. Ted said, "So much for tranquility. This is my point. How do you dare pretend this tattered facade is a tea ceremony? You exhibit only the shallowest grasp of time-honored rituals. This is just a load of frayed, new-age claptrap hiding behind the trappings of a traditional tea ceremony." "I'm sorry. My pores have been misrepresented. Would you like more tea? I mean, where's the respect, the purity, and the reverence?" Maud held her look. After a moment, he held his cup out. He wouldn't let go when Maud tried to take it. Careful not to burn him, she refilled his cup. "It's hot." "I know." He gave Silesia a stern look and brushed off his leg. Maud noticed that Silesia had begun to fidget. She declined more tea. "Silesia, tell us what brings you here," she sighed. It's all about my roommates. They aren't pets, but they're hamsters. Well, about 6 months ago, I was feeling lonely in my beautiful, spacious apartment. So I bought a couple of friends. Hate to have to buy a friend. Seems so entitled, but can't exactly meet a hamster at the local club. Maud nodded. Ted rolled his eyes. He whispered, "Can't you shut her up?" Everything was cool for a while. We got on famously. But then one day, I came home and discovered an extra dozen of the little critters. Who knew? All in one cage? Appalled, Silesia practically shouted. "Oh, no. I would never cage my friends. What do you take me for?" Agitated, Ted said, But is right. That was only the beginning. I've lost count. And that isn't even the worst part. Neither Maud nor Ted wanted to hear the worst. I discovered that they ate one of them. Maud nodded impassively. Yes, but nothing. I admit, I'm not that bothered that his family ate their baby brother. I mean, get real. Babies do get eaten. But poor little Jimmy. I'll never forget when I found little Jimmy was the hamster. Silesia looked at Ted like he was a lunatic. Focus, Ted. The circle of life and all that. I miss him. And Maud said, "Yes, I cannot get over." She dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Maud and Ted leaned in. After everything I did, just can't believe that they ate meat. Ted feigned a coughing fit to cover his laughter. Silesia waited for it to subside. I mean, what did I do wrong? How could they? Didn't I raise them right? You know, to be vegetarian. I thought they were. I didn't skimp in sympathy. Maud touched Silesia's right hand. She covered Maud's with her left. Maud placed her free hand on top of Silesia's. Misty-eyed, they turned to Ted. He said, "Looks like you're first at bat, Maud." They didn't understand. He said, "So, is this it? Sorry, but I have to get on with my day." Maud straightened up. "No, Ted. Now that we're in sync with each other, I'll serve another tea. One made for you alone. A special tea? Just for me?" Oh, boy. Maud resisted trying to kill Ted. She wouldn't poison him. At least, not in the usual way. But I'm not about to let this hack destroy everything I've built. She wanted Ted's comeuppance, not his life. This potion would take his words, silence him, at least for a few days. He said, "So what's in this special tea?" "Hold the cyanide." Only he laughed. Maud said, "I can't reveal my secret recipe, but it contains a mixture of frankincense, sandalwood, ylang-ylang, rose, pepperum. I could go on. You get the idea." Ted and Silesia were awed at the complexities of Maud's preparations. And Silesia, don't feel left out. I've also designed a special blend for you. They sat expectantly. Maud poured Ted's tea from a pot she'd set aside and handed him the small porcelain cup. He reached out, but stopped. Putting his hand up, he shook his head. "No thanks. The cup is chipped. I'll pass." Maud recovered. "You don't understand, Ted. It's not a chip. Only an irregularity in the glaze. These rare cups are highly prized, eagerly sought for." Ted couldn't care less. Silesia watched, fascinated. Maud continued, "You've heard of the Japanese tradition of mending a broken bowl with a vein of gold lining the crack? This is similar," Silesia said. "Oh, don't waste it. Give it to me." She reached out, "But it wasn't made for you. It's Ted's. Don't worry. I'll manage. It sounds delicious." This had never happened before. And this tea was pivotal to Maud's plan. She said, "If you insist." Ted said, "We all do." Silesia took Ted's cup, sipped, and smiled. Beginning to speak, she stopped and could only say, "More?" Not used to losing control, Maud refreshed Silesia's cup. Ted smiled at Silesia. "Ah, miss, the power of the well-chosen word." Silesia nodded, but could say nothing. Ted turned to Maud and said, "Good. You shut her up. At last." "I'll have some too," Maud said. "Yes, you need something. I can't have you go thirsty." Deftly switching pots, she poured him a cup of calming tea. They each smiled as he took the cup. He raised it in a mock toast and sipped. "Wow, that's delicious." He loosened his tie. "Maybe you sensed this, Maud, with your acute observational powers. I need to tell you, I write a column at the paper. Commentary, reviews, opinions on the world at large." He leaned forward and took Maud's hand. "I am happy to say you've earned yourself a glowing review," Maud replied. "Ted? You? A writer?" "I had no idea." She refilled his cup with tea, promoting a positive attitude. Go with the flow, she thought. Silesia remained silent. Ted waxed poetic. Tranquility reigned. The temporal drift. I could still feel the biting pressure of the zip ties on my wrists, the echoes of my parents' screams ringing in my ears. Time travel was my lock and key, a temporary solace from the agony of my past. But now, it felt like something more, a last-ditch effort to preserve my soul, to outrun the ghosts of my mistakes. I had never imagined that a time travel discovery, once a triumph, would come to haunt me. But there it was. George Walsh had entered my life under the guise of advancing my discovery, only to destroy the very essence of my work. Our captors, a part of international security for global government, wanted nothing more than to exploit my discovery for their own gain. Revenge was the one thing I craved, the one thing that consumed me completely. It was an equation, a system of cause and effect I could almost predict. George Walsh had taken everything from me. My parents, murdered my work, destroyed my life in fragments of emotional turmoil. He deserved to vanish from existence. And in the stillness of my heart, I felt more certain that I could make that happen and get away with it. But I was no longer the same person I had been months ago. I was someone different, someone capable of far darker things than I had ever realized. And that terrified me. I felt weight of the pocket watch in my hand like a leaden anchor, pulling me deeper into the darkness. Memories of my parents' screams echoed faintly in my mind, but I knew that if I let them take control, they would destroy me. The time travel device had given me power, yes, but power was a dangerous thing. As a physicist, I understood the delicate balance of energy and entropy. I knew that any small disturbance could lead to catastrophic consequences. Reality itself bending and breaking in ways I could not control. Emotions were overpowering my logic. Revenge was tempting, seductive even. It was a persistent force, creeping into my thoughts, pulling me back into the past, into the moments of pain and loss. It was intoxicating. I could almost taste it, feel it running through my veins. If I allowed it to consume me, I'd be no better than the very people I sought to destroy. I was at war with myself, my mind telling me to focus, to fight the urge for violence, but my body trembling with the desire to strike. My nails dug into my palms, a small anchor in the raging storm. I tried to breathe, to focus, but the thoughts were relentless. The mathematics of it all did not add up. I was trapped in a paradox of my own making. Every thought I had led to another, a series of equations that felt impossible to solve. Revenge would change everything, but I could not afford to lose control. If I did, I would make an irreversible mistake. Again, that would be truly brilliant, wouldn't it? Sleep offered no comfort, but a pattern emerged in the dreams that plagued me. They were not mine, not entirely. They were vivid, pulling me into a past that was not my own, into a time of great resistance and rebellion. The golden age of piracy, a period of defiance against oppressive forces, where violence and betrayal were everyday occurrences. I grasped onto that dream like a lifeline. Perhaps revenge was not my only option. Perhaps I could rewrite my own fate without destroying everything. However, the dark urge refused to be ignored. It whispered louder with every passing hour, its voice growing insistent and demanding. Revenge was cunning. It seeped into my bones, making it increasingly more difficult to think straight. It clawed at me, its claws like the jagged edges of a broken mirror. My hands convulsed. My heart raced. Every inch of me screamed for action. But I knew better. I was a scientist, after all. I understood systems, the way one small change could ripple outward and cause unintended consequences. Revenge was an unstable reaction. It would explode, and I would lose myself in the process. But I could not stop the storm inside of me. Time travel had never been attempted before. No one had ever successfully crossed the threshold between ages, and yet here I was, stuck in limbo, in a place where the boundaries of time blurred and twisted. I should have been focused, should have been calculating every detail of my destination, but instead, my mind was adrift. It was as if the chaos inside me had spilled into the very fabric of time itself, distorting my path. And then, just as the chaos threatened to take over, I felt it. A cold, icy hand of dissonance. It was me, or at least a version of me, that I no longer recognized. This version of me was lost in the darkness, a person forged by pain and revenge, someone I was terrified of becoming. It was as if my own fear gripped my heart, pulling me away from the edge of destruction. I closed my eyes, fighting for control. I couldn't think clearly. The rage was suffocating, like a fear that threatened to consume me whole. I tried to remember what I knew about systems. Could I control the chaos? I thought of thermodynamics, of entropy, and the second law, that everything tended toward disorder. Was this my own collapse? Was I simply a part of a greater, inevitable breakdown? I clutched the pocket watch, the mechanism cold against my skin. The ticking, once a comforting sound, now felt like the ticking of a bomb. Time was slipping away, but I had to make my choice. The past was a tangled mess, and if I tried to correct it, if I tried to rewrite it, I might undo everything I had worked for. But revenge was too tempting. It pressed against me, a living, breathing thing. I could not escape it. It was inside me. And yet, there was something else. Hope. Hope had always been so distant, something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in for so long. But in that moment, in that fractured, chaotic space, I grasped it with my fingertips. It was a lifeline, pulling me away from the precipice of vengeance. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to hold on to that warmth, a flicker of it, faint but undeniable. Could it really be there, in the darkest recesses of my mind? I closed my eyes, listening to my breath, steadying myself. The time travel device was my escape, but it could also serve to be my salvation. I didn't have to destroy everything to fix my mistakes. I could choose a different path, one that didn't lead to annihilation. The warm glow of hope began to spread from my fingertips. A tiny spark that grew with each breath I took. The darkness that had been clawing at me started to retreat, fading like a bad dream. The rage that had been consuming me felt distant now, as if it no longer had a hold on me. I focused on the past, on the golden age of piracy, a time where resistance thrived, not for vengeance, but for something greater, freedom. A different kind of rebellion. I felt the now familiar pull of time travel as the world around me warped. My body shuddered, the vertigo setting in, but I held on to the flicker of hope. I could escape the grip of revenge. I could escape my fate and choose something else. The darkness around me deepened, but this time I was not afraid. The weight of my decision was immense, but the warmth of hope anchored me. The past was waiting, but this time I was not running toward destruction. I was running toward a new future where pirates came to die. A breath of wind slithered through the ruins and tumbled across his weathered face as he pressed the shard of limestone down the dry ashlar wall, leaving a new etched tally mark. It was a dimly lit chamber inside what was once the world's most notorious pirate prison. For him, it was a sanctuary, a place of refuge. Once the web developer for Shackleford Inc., in a city of skyscrapers, eclectic culture, and ultra-modern technology, Tom Malone scanned his Neanderthal calendar. 240 tallies made up the wall. Some were circled, and only he knew why. Gone were the titles of husband, employee, and neighbor. Given his isolated surroundings, the term castaway was more appropriate. A life filled with country club galas, company retreats, and exotic travel was lost. Survival had replaced living. Tom buttoned his slightly torn flannel shirt and grabbed his coat. He exited the chamber where the wrought iron door, rusted and bent, hung by a single hinge. He moved down the main corridor and stepped through a hollowed-out gap in the outer wall. The Rook, as it was called, was made up of 3 layers, undoubtedly to make escape near impossible for even the smartest buccaneer. If the legends were true, the Rook had seen the likes of Edward Davis and even Black Anthony. Zipping his coat, he trudged down the path to the beach. This was his routine every day. 2 laps around the island. The overcast sky produced a gloomy horizon, but that was normal for this time of year, or so he assumed. If the tallies were correct, it should be October. The sea was a gray mass of rippling currents. Tom breathed profoundly, absorbing the salty fragrance. The flow of the ambient tide took him back to simpler times when walking on a beach meant hunting for shark teeth, metal detecting for forgotten coins and jewelry, and collecting seashells that made their way into the guest bathroom. Such days seemed as far out of reach as the horizon. Suddenly, he spotted tracks. They snaked from the north before turning about just outside the rook's outer wall. He recognized the tread patterns as those of a Jeep Wrangler. Tom followed, occasionally glancing over his shoulder. When he reached the familiar bend on the beach, he heard the blast of a horn and dove behind a line of palm trees. Peering through the trunks, he noticed a docked ferry on the beach. A Jeep was climbing the ramp onto the ferry. Personnel in neon-colored jackets moved about the deck. Another search party, he thought. A mustached man in uniform, wearing the same jacket, examined an area in the sand. He spoke into his radio before moving further inland. Tom's heart leapt into his throat when he caught sight of the woman following behind. She wore a yellow raincoat, and her arms were folded tightly as the sea breezes pushed ashore. Her curls flailed and whipped, no matter what direction she faced. She said something to her uniformed companion and advanced toward the tree line. "No," Tom muttered, before slipping back from the bend. He tried to quicken his pace, but the dry sand absorbed every step. Once back in the chamber, he dropped to the floor and focused on slowing his breathing. The acoustics had almost given him away during the initial search months earlier. His heart drummed, and his temporal pulse thumped. He caught his face in the mirror, fragment by the tally wall. It had belonged to the mirror in the cabin cruiser's bathroom before Tom dismantled the $1 million yacht upon his arrival. He gazed at the worn face and graying beard. Then there was the scar, where scalding grease once landed. "Tom!" came the woman's voice. He pressed against the chamber wall like a spy dodging a spotlight. "Mrs. Malone, we've searched the ruins before with no luck." He assumed this was the uniformed man. Tom felt his way down the chamber wall and gripped a loose stone. After a few careful tugs, it came out of its place. He reached into the cavity and pulled out the dust-covered Glock. "Tom!" Squeezing the seasoned grip, he inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and exhaled. His mind traveled to the frost-covered day after his father was buried. Tom opened the gun cabinet and retrieved the pistol his father taught him to shoot with. "This will be yours someday," he would say at the range. Tom choked back the mist that wanted to erupt from his eyes. None of it matters now. Too much has happened. He took another lungful before pursing his lips and blowing out. He eyed the tallied wall and totaled the circled marks. 16. He suspected as much, but now he knew. One bullet remained. "We need to call off the search." He called out, his voice nearer than before. That meant she was too. "No, he's here. I know it," came her distraught and shaking voice. Tom pressed harder to the wall. He hoped the ancient stone could absorb him and conceal any trace of a man desperate to remain in the shadows. "Ma'am, the weather is slowing us down, and the city cannot afford a stranded ferry with personnel on board. Would you stop if it was not if it meant putting others in danger." He ran his free hand over the scar. He traced the tight line of skin that ran from beneath his eye to the corner of his mouth. The sting had subsided long ago, but the hurt ran deep. "Please," she pleaded, "just let me look in here." The man radioed the ferry that he was making a final sweep of the old ruins, and that preparations for departure should begin immediately. For a moment, all was still. "Tom!" came the frantic echo. He slid his finger over the cold trigger. "Never again will you scar me, Maria," he whispered. A single shot rang from the remnants of a place where pirates came to die, distorted. I left home 5 years ago. As soon as I crossed that stage, high school diploma in hand, bypassing my peers, swept up by a wave of crying mums and proud grandparents, I was done. The boot of my car held as much of my 18 years of life as I could stuff into 3 boxes and 1 suitcase. I'd armed myself with a bank account full of every tip and paycheck I'd received from my waitressing job and an early acceptance offer from a university 2 states away, as far as I could get from a place I'd once called home. The night before, as my parents sat in some fancy restaurant for a reservation with friends they'd forgotten to tell me about, undoubtedly arguing with each other behind plastic smiles, I packed away my clothes and books and bed sheets in neat little rows until my room was almost barren. Apart from the old wooden furniture, my bedroom was cleaner than it had probably ever been, and I laughed at thinking about how, if the situation was different, it might finally make my mother happy with me. At 10:07 p.m., they arrived home, my father slamming the door as their whisper shouting floated upstairs. I knew they weren't being considerate of the fact that I might be sleeping, but rather they worried about the possibility that a commotion might alert the neighbors, that they would see through the cracks in the foundations of their picture-perfect dream house. They didn't come in to say goodnight. Hadn't since I was 8, and old enough to read myself to sleep. As I pulled out of the parking lot and left my formative school years in the back windshield, I thought about what my parents would tell their friends, the neighbors, the busybodies in the grocery store checkout line. Would they lie and tell everyone I had accepted a scholarship for some prestigious university overseas? Or maybe I'd traveled to Africa to work in humanitarian aid, something they could brag about and say, "She's made us so proud." Possibly, they'd invent a job with NASA or an internship at Google. They hardly knew enough about me to know what I'd actually be studying or what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was sure they wouldn't be bold enough to tell the truth, that their daughter had disappeared without warning while they spent their day in board meetings and having sex with their personal assistants in hotel rooms paid for by their companies. There would be no missing persons report or flyers offering an egregious sum of money in reward for my safe return home. Nothing that would cast a shadow on their spotless reputations. I would fade further into the background of their lives, as if a figment of their imagination, only resurrected when one of their friends spotted me in one of the professionally shot family photos, stilted and artificial, and asked after me. That's if they kept the frames up at all. My parents would have to dig up my coffin from the deepest parts of their memory, plaster a smile on their face, and grit their teeth. They would spin some vague anecdote about speaking to me on the telephone last Tuesday and how well I was doing, and maybe they'd go visit me at Christmas. They'd have forgotten all about me by the time they brought out the first course. I mean, they hardly remembered I existed, even while we lived under the same roof. That's why I was so shocked when they called me one Sunday, 5 years after I left town and never looked back, and asked me to come for a visit soon. I had no idea how they knew my number. I'd changed it after moving and never given them the new one. That's why I didn't respond for almost a minute after hearing my father's voice through the tiny speaker. I almost convinced myself I was dreaming or having a stroke. Maybe I'd temporarily slipped into an alternate reality where it was normal for my father to have my number, to call me out of the blue and invite me over. Anything to explain why the fuck he was calling. There was no special occasion. Nobody was sick and dying, and there was no upcoming birthday to celebrate. They just wanted to see how I was doing and make amends. They missed me, they said, through the crackling of the landline. I wondered if they had finally snapped and gone crazy, if they'd learned a sense of humor and this was some kind of prank. Or perhaps they had early onset dementia and had forgotten that I had never been much more than a roommate they had complained about having to spend their hard-earned money on. I told them I would think about it and immediately hung up. I spent the next 2 days trying to forget about it altogether until I came home from work to a letter in my mailbox, a one-way ticket dated 2 weeks from then, set to arrive at the airport an hour out from the town I grew up in. On the front of the envelope, my address, written in my mother's sloping, elegant handwriting. Nausea settled in the pit of my belly. How did they know my address? I'd not kept in contact with a single person from my childhood. The hairs on the back of my neck tingled as the growing sense of being watched settled into my skin. Then a thought popped into my head. Had they known the whole time? Had they known where I was all these years and never bothered to reach out? Suddenly, I was 12 again, and realizing my parents were never going to care about me the way the kids at school were cared for. This confirmed what I had always known. I was alone in this world. It took some deliberating, but I decided I would go. I would see what it was they wanted from me, and if they really had changed. I told myself I wouldn't give in to whatever manipulation tactics they might pull. I would be strong and remain distant. And when it was done, I would demand that they never contact me again. Even still, my bones were heavy with paranoia the following weeks. I elected to hire a rental car to drive from the airport to their house. There was no way I'd give my parents the satisfaction of driving me, of having any modicum of control over me once more. And this way, if I needed to leave, I wouldn't be forced to wait 20 minutes for a taxi. I parked on the street. The house had been repainted a soft eggshell color instead of the previous gray and rows of gardenias lined the fence where there had once been neat box hedges. I breathed deeply through my nose before raising my hand to knock. My mother pulled the door open as my fist made contact with the wood, causing me to stumble back. She must have been watching me from the window. Waiting, she was smiling. That was strange in its own right, but it was weirder because I knew it wasn't my mother's smile. Her smile never reached her eyes. She would never do anything that would cause lines to form on her face. Her smile always gave you the sense that she was laughing at you rather than with you, pitying you. My mother did not smile, but when she did, it was always forced. This was a genuine smile. It was happy. I felt immediately that something was deeply wrong. A shiver ran through my spine. There was something wrong about her face. It was fuzzy around the edges, as if she was wearing a mask. I rubbed at my eyes with closed fists, trying to clear my vision, but the effect remained. I figured I was tired from my flight, but the closer I inspected her, the clearer it became that something was off. It looked as if someone had tried to draw her face as accurately as possible. After taking a long glance at a picture of it, my mother reached towards me with outstretched arms and drew me into an embrace. I stood stiffly, with my arms by my side, trying and failing to remember when she had last hugged me. Surely at some point in my childhood. Definitely not after the age of 10. She invited me inside. This house was nothing like the one I'd left. Cold and sparse, decorated as if a model home. It was warm and filled with color and light. I wondered if somehow my memories of my horrible, lonely childhood had managed to warp my recollection of the house itself. But I knew that wasn't right. This new hallway was illuminated by a warm glow, and funky paintings hung from the walls. The dining table was set with a red gingham tablecloth that my mother would have called tacky, and a vase of sunflowers. In the kitchen, my father took a large tray out of the oven before pausing to take a long pull from the neck of a beer bottle. I had never seen my father drink beer before. He used to say it was the common man's drink, and that real men drank whiskey. He turned to say hello, and where his face had once been clean-shaven and professional, stubble grew freely. Like my mother, something was off. And it wasn't just the facial hair. His nose was smaller than I remembered. Eyes just a fraction too far apart. From afar, or at a passing glance, it was the man I'd grown up with. But as he stepped closer to greet me, his features shifted. It was like looking at an optical illusion. And when I changed my gaze, the true image would slip into place. They watched me. To anyone else, it might seem they were worried, for I hadn't said a word since my mother opened the door. But I could see it in their eyes, the suspicion. They were wondering if I'd noticed, waiting for me to say something. I stuttered out empty platitudes about being happy to see them, and they shuffled me over to sit at the table. Dinner was pistachio-encrusted chicken breast served with a peach and goat cheese salad. When my father announced the menu, I stopped short, fork raised halfway to my mouth. My mother was allergic to pistachios. This was a fact she despised, as she perceived any sort of weakness to be a flaw, and my mother was not flawed. I said as much, but my mother just stared at me with an odd look and told me she didn't have any allergies. She never had. And then she went on eating, cutting her chicken into bite-sized cubes and placing them delicately on her tongue, never breaking out in hives or becoming short of breath as her throat closed up. I was beginning to feel as if I was going out of my mind. I managed to stumble my way through conversation, letting my parents do the brunt of the work, barely processing a word they said. I excused myself to my room, citing exhaustion and an early night. My father followed with my bag, and as I reached the top of the stairs and turned right towards my old bedroom, he laughed at me. It wasn't the same boisterous laugh he'd had at dinner when discussing his golfing buddies. It was sharp and croaky, like it didn't belong to him. I hadn't seen my father laugh enough as a child to know which one was more his own. My bedroom was to the left, he said, with a curious look on his face. Don't you remember? And he pushed past me, guiding me down the corridor to a room I knew was not mine. I followed him slowly. Inside the doorway, he dropped my bag, calling good night over his shoulder as he moved back downstairs. I locked the door. The furniture was the same, but there were pictures on the wall I had no recollection of. Myself and my parents at the beach and in the snow and with my grandparents. These were not my pictures. My mother hated the sand, and the first time I'd been to the beach was with some uni friends a year after I left home. I had never met my grandparents, let alone taken photographs with them. They had both died before I was born. I sat down on the bed. It was made tidily, with the same striped sheets I had packed in a box all those years ago. I sat there for hours, listening as my parents cleaned and made their way to bed. When I was sure they were sleeping, I slipped out the door and into the rental car. As I drove to the airport, heart racing against my rib cage, I knew one thing for sure. I was certain that those people were not my parents. Monochromatic. This story includes depictions of mental health and death. There is nothing graphic, but these topics are touched on. I had never been quite fond of Eve. As her psychiatric nurse, the buoy who kept her from drowning in an ocean of madness, I should have made an effort to respect my patient. I should have, and yet I couldn't. It was unbearable to deal with a soul so far gone, someone so dreadfully insane. Nonetheless, Evelyn Barrett was still mine to care for, my own burden. It was odd to dwell on the fact that someone so young, barely even 18 to be exact, could mentally fall down such a slippery slope. Eve was admitted to the sanitarium around 2 months ago, following her breakdown at school. According to her classmates, Eve had never been social. She tended to keep to herself when given the choice. And while this was not abnormal behavior for a teenage girl, it had always been different with Eve. Well, it had grown to become different. Students began reporting incidents involving Eve. They would hear her muttering to herself in class, her words unintelligible, but her whispers crazed. They would hear her sobbing in bathroom stalls. Her teachers noticed her grades slipping. Eve would write ominous messages on her papers, and she would draw horrific drawings in her notebook. Drawings of characters plucked straight from horror movies, monsters. Though her behavior was abnormal, Eve caused no problems. She remained silent, which was nothing out of the ordinary. She basked in the endless insanity of her paranoid, twisted mind. But at that time, no one was aware of how truly twisted it was. After months of containment, Eve suddenly exploded. She jumped up in the middle of class and shrieked, screaming bloody murder. Accounts of the story from her classmates explained that Eve screamed, "Leave me alone," dozens of times. According to the witnesses, Eve was not talking to a specific person, not one that anyone could see anyway. Her teachers restrained her and subdued her screams. Her behavior was, according to her classmates, purely and utterly horrifying, insane. And so, I was stuck with Evelyn Barrett. I tried to build connections with my patients, and usually I was successful. Over my years as a nurse, I liked to think that my psychological support helped my patients heal. It did. There was no doubt about it. I did my job well until Eve came along. For some odd reason, I could not break through with Eve, break into her subconscious and heal her fragile mind. Whenever I tried to talk to her, she would do one of two things. Either she would completely block me out, or she would scream nonsense at me. In any case, neither method was beneficial in the slightest. The past 2 months had consisted of pointless therapy sessions and no progress whatsoever. I couldn't help but feel sorry for the poor girl. As I walked into my tidy office, I pushed out a sigh and slumped into my armchair. Eve was scheduled to meet with me at any second, and to be quite honest, I was dreading our session. Up until now, my day had been calm. My serenity was about to be interrupted simply by being in the presence of the crazed child. 3 knocks on the door was all it took. My spine straightened, and I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. My automatic physical response whenever Eve was near. The creaking of the door disturbed my therapeutic silence, and as I watched a caretaker escort Eve through the doorway, a queasy feeling began to form in my gut. Eve seemed on edge today, more on edge than normal. Her long cascade of honey blonde hair was ruffled, as though she couldn't be bothered to run a comb through it. Her face was a sickly shade of white. The shadows casted upon her face complemented the lack of life within her frozen, gray eyes. Eyes that hardly looked like eyes at all. She looked dreadful. The caretaker made sure that Eve settled comfortably on the couch before taking her leave. Nevertheless, Eve looked nothing but uncomfortable. She brought her knees to her chest and hugged them tightly, her body resembling something of a ball. Her hands shook while her feet tapped on the cushion over and over again. It was easy to assume that nerves had Eve in a chokehold. "How are you doing today, Eve?" I asked the girl, my voice visibly annoyed. I didn't care enough to put on a facade for her. Eve wasn't fond of me, as far as I could tell. It was obvious by the way her eyes ever so slightly cut into my face, as though they were 2 honed knives. Regardless, the feeling was mutual, and so treating one another this way had become routine. Usually when I asked her a question, Eve ignored it completely. I assumed she would simply ignore me by the way her gaze dug into my skin, and so I wasted no time before pulling out my notebook. Lazily, I jotted down a note. "Silence," I wrote. Nothing out of the ordinary, until I heard a raspy breath emerge from her mouth. "He's going to kill me soon," Eve muttered, her voice barely a whisper. I could hardly comprehend her words. Her empty eyes widened as her fingernails dug into her pants. The girl rocked back and forth in a crazed manner, almost as though she truly feared for her life. I, for one, believed that Eve was bananas, but as her nurse, I could not disregard such an alarming phrase. "Who?" Who's going to kill you? I asked, as calmly as possible. Though I knew that Eve was completely mad, I knew that she was. Her words still managed to send a chill through my bones. Eve disregarded my words for a moment, her mind unable to flee from whatever eternal nightmare it was trapped in. Her gaze remained on the ground and focused on anything but me. Seconds ticked by. Minutes. Finally, Eve's eyes snapped to mine, somehow more frantic than before. He's taking over my life, the world around me, everything. She snapped loudly, her sharp words making me flinch. Her body recoiled after her outburst, and she scrunched back into her ball with a shaken expression on her face. "He's going to kill me soon," she repeated. "I just know it." With a sigh, I set my notebook aside and leaned forward. This wasn't the first time that Eve had acted up during a session, but this was the first time that she seemed so sure. So sure about the fact that something was bothering her. I said, "You are safe here, Eve. Nothing is going to kill you. This is all in your mind, okay? You're okay." "No, please, Debbie. I am not insane. This is real," Eve persisted. Hearing her say my name was odd. She had never addressed me before, and until now, I did not know that she even knew my name. He's out to get me. The Shadow Man. He's the Shadow Man? I repeated incredulously. Despite Eve's urgency, I did not believe her words. Her crazed, perplexing words. She had never once opened up to me like this, and so I had no reason to believe that she was telling the truth now. Instead of dismissing her comment, I wanted to dig further. It was my job, after all. "Who is he?" Eve shuddered, as though a gust of icy wind had blown through the room. "I don't know." She paused abruptly and locked eyes with me. "But he takes things from me. He steals them." Despite my confusion, I played into her claim. "What does he take from you?" Eve blinked multiple times. "Color. Color? The color that I see. The color that she sees. What does that mean, Eve?" I asked, and anxiety grasped my brain. Her answer, while strange, was also oddly specific. And something about that was off-putting. Color blindness. Was that what Eve was hinting at? Were colors fading from her vision? I took my assumption and rolled with it. "Does your family have a history of color blindness?" That sounded about right. Perhaps Eve was losing her sense of color, and she was freaking out about it. That wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary, but it was obviously nothing to go crazy about. No, it's not color blindness. He takes the color from me." She snapped again, her expression flushing with maroon fury. "You're wrong. I am not crazy. You think I am, but I'm not. I'm not." Suddenly, Eve was on her feet, marching across the room to my desk. I sat up out of habit and hesitated. Eve seemed angry. Was she going to attack me? Grab for a weapon? I decided to take no chances, and I, too, rose to my feet. I turned to face Eve, only to find that she was inspecting various objects on my desk. Colored pens, Post-its, my computer. It's all black and white. Everything. She picked up a lime green Post-it and shook it in her hand. I can't tell what color this is. He stole it from me. It's gone. It's all gone. He's gonna kill me once everything is gone. Eve, calm down. No, I can't. Eve paused abruptly when her eyes fell upon a particular object on my desk. Her mouth gaped open as she snatched the object, inspecting it in awe. I almost reached for her arm and demanded for her to put the object down, but I restrained myself. Eve held the card that my daughter had made for me years ago. On the front of the card was a drawing of a rainbow, colored messily with crayon. My daughter had handcrafted the card when I fell terribly ill, and I believe that the card itself had cured me. I had kept it lying on my desk all these years, and the messy rainbow had been my constant reminder that color can supply us with life and wellness. And now, as Eve's shaky hands grasped the card, I fought the urge to snatch it from her. This card was precious to me. I couldn't risk her ruining it. It's colorful. She gasped in awe, her eyes absorbing the card as though its sparkles were emitting from it. I can see the rainbow. He hasn't stolen it from me. Suddenly, Eve's guard was up once again, and she clenched the card against her chest. I winced as the paper grew crinkled in her strong grasp. I need to keep this card with me. I can't let the Shadow Man steal it. It's all I have left. Protectively, I shook my head. My deranged patient could not be trusted with my precious card, my personal gift from my daughter. No, I don't think that's... Debbie, please, Eve urged. For one moment, the desperation in her voice made her sound sane. This is life or death. I am not insane. He is going to kill me. I can't let him steal the color from this. It's all I have. Please. Hesitance gripped me by the throat, and I opened my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Eve stared me down, and her empty eyes were suddenly not empty anymore. They weren't lifeless. Instead, they seemed brighter, filled with life, with hope. I had never seen this side of Evelyn Barrett before. I stuttered. Nothing is going to happen to you, Eve. You don't need this card. But as I said these words, even I heard the doubt within my voice. I felt that I would regret keeping the card. Perhaps if I gave Eve the card to borrow, she would feel more at ease. Perhaps this card was the key to break through into Eve's mind. Perhaps she wasn't so far gone. Reluctantly, I backed away from the girl. "Just keep it for now. That's fine," I sighed. Eve's eyes sparkled, and a hint of a smile pricked at her lips. She looked normal, as though she didn't live in a sanitarium. "Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, thank you," she repeated hastily. "Just return it to me when you no longer need it." Of course. Eve's mannerism was completely different than it had been when she first arrived. As she continued inspecting the card in awe, I couldn't help but smile. Perhaps I could help her. Perhaps the Eve that I was not quite fond of was fading, and a new girl was coming to light. Either way, I felt the start of something new. Hope. The next day, I was scheduled to check up on Eve. The feeling of apprehension that usually sat in the pit of my stomach was gone. Ever since our session yesterday, I had faith that my patient was healing, truly healing. I walked with optimism, hopeful that my relationship with Eve was growing stronger. One of the best feelings as a therapist was knowing that you were of aid to your patient, that you were able to dig them out of a great hole. It felt rewarding, fulfilling. I approached Eve's door and knocked gently so as not to startle her. Though she was in the process of healing, she was still fragile. I waited for a few seconds before knocking again. Eve did not respond, and I heard no noise from inside the room. The queasy feeling in my stomach returned. I knocked louder. No response. To accompany my uneasiness, an alarm resonated through my skull. Something was wrong. Skeptically, I pushed open the door and took a quick glance around the room. It didn't take long for me to spot her. Eve. She was sprawled out on the ground, unconscious. Without hesitation, I crouched on the floor next to her, shaking her shoulder. "Eve? Eve?" I blurted. There was no response. She didn't move. "No, Eve. Wake up." My chest felt light as I reached for Eve's delicate wrist. There was no pulse. In fact, her skin was a block of ice. "Oh my God, Eve." Numbly, my eyes trailed over towards her hand. Her fingers limply held a little slip of paper with a rainbow on it. The card that my daughter made. The next few moments were a blur. My body began moving on its own, while my mind remained stuck on the image of Eve's body on the floor. Her still, pale body. As I unconsciously grabbed the card out of Eve's limp hand and shoved it in my pocket, I heard muffled voices entering the bedroom, scrambling around me, asking me what had happened. I didn't process the question, couldn't process it. All of my senses were honed in on Eve, on the fact that she was dead. Nurses surrounded Eve and I, and before I knew it, I was laying on the ground too, losing consciousness. I felt as though I was floating in outer space, and it became a struggle to breathe. My vision was fading into a deep darkness. and everyone near me was fading. The nurses, Eve, everything was fading. I was grasping onto nothing. But no, something was still there, hidden in the corner of my periphery. Though it blended within the darkness overtaking my mind, it wasn't completely hidden. I saw it, him, though hardly visible. I was still able to make out the silhouette of a large man standing in the corner of the room. He hardly looked like a man at all, really. As far as I could tell, he had no hair, no face. He looked like an apparition by the way he blended into the wall behind him. He was the absence of everything, a void where light should have been. It was impossible to make out the distinct features of the man. But even with a blurry glimpse, I knew that the man was something of a sinister entity. Evil. As I blacked out, 2 words repeatedly rang in my head. They reverberated deeply, their consonants sounding of menacing death knells. It was all I heard as I lost consciousness. Shadow man, shadow man, shadow man. I woke up with a start on the couch in my office. My thoughts immediately trailed to what I last could remember. They trailed to Eve. She had died. Was that all a dream? What if it wasn't? What was the cause of her death? She was healthy, physically at least. Nothing made sense. The shadowed silhouette grazed my thoughts, and a chill fell over my body. I must have been imagining the man. I had not been in the right state of mind, nearly on the brink of passing out. It was an illusion. It had to be. So why was it that Eve had also been hallucinating a shadow man? A lump in my pocket alerted my senses, and I reached for whatever was inside. My fingers lifted out a piece of crinkled paper, scrunched up in a ball. The card. It was ruined, shoved in my pocket like a piece of trash as my eyes welled up with tears. I unfolded the paper and examined the rainbow on the front. I blinked multiple times and wiped away the tears from my eyes. Something wasn't right. My vision was playing games with me as I stared at the card, at the sloppy rainbow on the front. My heart dropped as I realized something. Eve wasn't crazy. The rainbow on the front of the card was no longer drawn in colorful crayon. It was purely black and white, the trip of a lifetime. The trees are so much bigger out here, I said, as I looked out the passenger side car window. We were driving from the airport in the cab we just got. The lady driving was rude. She barely even looked at us. But we're out of there, and officially on vacation. The flight was long. I tried to sleep, but the man next to me was a talker. I'm too nice, my girlfriend says, but that's what keeps the world a better place. Besides, the man kept buying me drinks, which is why I'm looking out the window. I might hurl and greener. This place is beautiful, says Kenny. We're finally in the Pacific Northwest. Our bags are packed, and we're headed to Mat Hood. We have a week out here, and 4 days spent in the mountains. Kenny has family out here, so we're staying with his aunt the first night, and then we're off to breathe that crisp forest air. We made it to his aunt's house. She was so warm and welcoming. I felt right at home. After a nice meal of homemade beef stew and a shower, I was ready for bed. I bid them good night, and off I went, fast asleep in no time. I woke up in a panic. The room unfamiliar. Where am I? I thought, as my senses start to adjust. There's a soft buzzing coming from the fluorescent lights above me. My arms and legs are secured to this hospital bed, it seems. But this doesn't feel like a hospital. It's too cold. I try to move my head, but that's secured too. Hello? I call, but no answer. Hello. Again silence. Suddenly a man is standing above me. He covers my mouth as I go to scream once more. Shut up! They'll know you're awake. And then they'll make you forget. You mustn't forget. It's not safe. Run! Something pokes me, and I'm out again. I awake in bed, extremely well rested. It's 6 o'clock a.m. What a crazy dream, I thought, as I smelt the coffee. I jump out of bed and run to the kitchen, where Kenny's Aunt Gloria is standing in her long silk lavender-colored nightgown and matching slippers. She seems so frail, yet strong and intimidating at the same time. A soft smile forms as she bids me good morning. Ken's not up yet, but you're more than welcome to join me for some bean water, she says with a chuckle. I follow her outside to the patio. The air is fresh and moist, the coffee warm and delicious. You can see the sun glisten off the morning dew as the birds sing their welcome to the day. It sure is nice of you to let us stay here, I say. Kenny and I have been planning this trip for a while now, and I'm so excited it's finally happening. You two boys, be careful out there. I hear stories all the time about hikers going missing in those woods. These aren't like the mountains you have on the East Coast. These are real mountains, inhabited by really big creatures. I'm sure you've heard of Bigfoot. She says. I chuckle. Ha, Bigfoot, please. He's just a myth. If Bigfoot is real, then I hope I see him. He'll take a photo and become rich. Gloria shook her head and looked deep into her coffee, almost as if she was trying to see the bottom of her cup through the black liquid it now held. Like I said, just be careful, please. It's now 10 a.m., and we are on our way to the mountain. Gloria let us use her car since she doesn't drive anymore. She's 75 now, and hasn't driven since she was 70, and got lost driving home. They found her a day later, parked in a parking area 15 miles from the house. We made it to the mountain after about 2 hours of driving, and we couldn't wait to get on the trail. As we loaded up our packs, Kenny and I discussed our route, where we would stop for water and lunch breaks, where we would camp, and which streams we will pass, so we know where to collect water when we get low. All said and done, the trail up and down the mountain shouldn't take more than 3 days, but we're taking it slow since we haven't done a mountain of this caliber before, so we planned for 4 days. We're hiking Timberline Trail. It passes 3 major landmarks and has snow runoff year-round, so finding water shouldn't be a problem. In total, it's just over 41 miles. We're all loaded up and ready to start our hike when I realize I left my trekking poles at the airport. They must have fallen out of my pack. Just find a stick on the hike. It'll serve the same purpose, says Kenny. I mock him, but I know that's what will happen. Easy for you to say. You didn't forget anything, but he did. The compass. Well, how are we supposed to know where we're going now? I ask. We still have a map, and the trails are marked. It'll be fine, he says in a not-so-reassuring voice. We've been walking for hours, and I haven't seen a single soul. It's day 2 in the woods. The first day went by so fast, but now the excitement and newness has worn off. The woods are long and damp, flora as far as the eye can see. No roads, cars, people. Hey, are we on the right path? I ask. Yeah, we should be coming up on Cloud Cap in about 5 more miles. Ken responds. I don't believe him, though, and my body hurts. It must be from sleeping on the ground. And I kept having the dream about the guy telling me to run. Maybe that's just making me paranoid. There, see? I told you we're going the right way. That must be Cloud Cap Inn, exclaimed Ken. As I stumbled over the hill, I saw what appeared to me as an abandoned shack in the middle of the forest. I don't think that's it, I yell, but Ken was already sprinting towards the front door. I call first shower, he yells as he enters the doors. I approach the building cautiously, examining the weathered cedar shakes, the broken shutters hanging from the windows. How is this place still in business? I thought. I push open the heavy oak door, and inside, the place looks immaculate. It's an open floor plan with 2 massive fireplaces at either side of the room. The carpet covers the hardwood floor, and drapes cover the windows. I look to the front desk. It's the man from my dream. I told you to run, he says as a loud bang comes from the room upstairs. Kenny screams, bang! Then silence. I run as fast as I can up the stairs. skipping 4 steps at a time. I take a left. The hallway goes on forever. Which room did it come from? "Kenny!" I yell as I'm racing down the hallway. I hear no response. "Kenny!" Again, nothing. I ran downstairs, and there's no one around. The doors are locked, and I can't get out. I try for a window, but they're boarded up from the inside. I ran back upstairs and tried those windows, but to no avail. I'm trapped. But how? Why? Just as I ask this, I hear a noise coming from the stairs. I turn around, and there I see it. Kenny's body, 2 gunshot wounds. "It must feed," says a voice from the other end of the room. I turn to look. "Gloria?" Bang. My knee is on fire. I cry out in pain as the creature appears. I look into its bright yellow eyes, soulless and empty. Its teeth big and sharp. Lips stained with blood. "Why Gloria?" "Because I love him," she says, as she points the gun straight at me. "And he loves me." Bang! I fall to the ground. The world seems blurry. I see the smoke coming from the barrel of the Smith & Wesson. I see Kenny stand and take the gun from his aunt. Just as my eyes close for the final time, I should have ran. The end. So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.